The Faith Matrix, Point 7, Heritage and Tradition. With this video, we're getting into the last of the four balances in the Faith Matrix in faith. This one has to do with the balance of time between past and future, or as we're going to call them, heritage and hope.
People say that you can't change the past. Well, that's not true. We change the past all the time. In fact, we're constantly changing the past. The reason that we say that is because the past as an entity never exists anymore. What exists is our memories, our conclusions, our impressions of the past. Those can change. The one thing that remains of the past are our reactions and interpretations of it. How we see our past and the world's past affects our faith today. When we change our faith, we change the way we see the past. We see it in a whole different light. Tragedies become victories. Victories become tragedies. What we used to think of as defeats, we now look at as successes. The facts of the past don't change, but our understanding and interpretation of the past change all the time. When we discover our true heritage in our faith and what we have inherited from it, we face the opportunity of reinterpreting the past, and in doing that, having a new beginning and a new life.
Now, what is heritage? Well, think about the heritage of the Christian faith as a kind of a great tree. We're all on the outermost branches of that. In our understanding, we're all unrelated. We're just different churches. But if we trace our origin back in time, we discover that one branch is connected to all the other branches. The further we go back, the more we discover our commonality until we all come to this common roots, the common source that holds us together, which is Christ and the apostles. Heritage makes brothers and sisters of us all. We are all related to each other through history. Our knowledge of our heritage has repeatedly helped us to challenge the errors of the present. Now, why is heritage important? Well, first of all, because it defines who we are. We can never fully escape our roots because they're part of us. Heritage also provides us with the necessary stability to keep from being rocked by temporary crises. Ecclesiastes reminds us that there's really nothing new under the sun. In times of crisis, this knowledge is power. Knowing that others have endured worse than what we've seen gives us hope that we can endure too. Our heritage carries with it a responsibility to bring out what is good of the past and bring it forward to the future. We owe to future generations to pass on what is best of the past. The body of Christ is not only composed of many individuals, but also of many churches and church organizations. Each church tradition contributes its own distinct personality to the body of Christ. Like organs in the body, the traditions of the church come together to make a whole picture of Christ. Our relationship to history is like the rings of a tree. Each successive generation of Christians adds to the growth that was put there by the last. We do not deny the growth that came before us. We build upon it, adding one more layer of wisdom to the past as we emerge from what came before. Seeking our heritage enables us to grow stronger with every successive generation. Philosopher George Santayana famously said, "Progress, far from consisting in change, depends on retentiveness. When change is absolute, there remains no being to improve and no direction to set for possible improvement. And when experience is not retained, as among savages, infancy is perpetual. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." In order to enjoy the fruits of our heritage, we must cultivate these virtues: honor, memory, and fidelity. Honor is a debt we owe to the people of the past to preserve their legacy for the future. Honor is also a form of love, putting ourselves in submission to the wishes and the desires of others, even to those who are not around anymore. It does not matter if the person is dead or alive, we still need to honor them. Honoring is something we do not because it is required by somebody else, but because our nature requires us to pay it. We are not bound to obey those of the past, but honor requires that we give weight to their wishes and preserve their legacy for the future. Memory is remembering the things that have gone before. To have memory is to have wisdom. We are repeatedly told in Proverbs that wisdom comes from listening to the voices of our fathers and our mothers. We listen to the voice of the past so that we can have wisdom today. Fidelity is the virtue of being faithful where we are planted. Jesus said to his disciples in Matthew 10:11, "Whatever town or village you enter, search for those worthy person there and stay with that at that house until you leave." There's something to be said about staying put. Loyalty requires that we honor the nation, the church, the tradition where God first put us. There are many legitimate reasons for leaving a church, for leaving a town, for leaving a community. But without a good cause, we may miss what God is doing with us there. Changing traditions in churches should be a rarity and not a rule for us. Jesus demonstrated this love of heritage in his own character. He honored the traditions of his forefathers, observing all of the feast days of the Jews, even those that were not specifically commanded under the law. He declared that he came to the Jews, his cultural tradition, first. He honored his parents, even when they were wrong. Now let's talk about how we can build our faith through honoring our heritage. First of all, know the roots. Understand the roots of your faith that will cause us to understand ourselves better. Second, taste the fruits. Getting in touch with the roots of our faith gives us a sense of belonging to something greater than ourselves. Study the teachings. Learning about what your church believes deepens and challenges your faith. And finally, appreciate the rituals. Experiencing our own faith heritage gives us a certainty in life that we can pass on to our children. Here are some of the ways that you can know the roots of your faith. One is through something called commemorations. Commemorations are the lives of saints, the stories of famous people that have lived within the Christian faith, and particularly within our tradition. Learn about the heroes of the faith. Evangelicals are fond of saying that faith has no grandchildren. Even so, we must realize that every generation had people who dedicated themselves to God from whom we can learn. We owe it to ourselves to know their stories and who made it possible for us to believe as we do today. Second, and this is a very new thing, is a faith genome. Sit down and make a chart of where you came from spiritually. What was the faith of your father, your mother, your grandparents? Who are the people who influenced you in your life, and what kind of faith traditions did they come from? Exploring these relationships are going to teach you a lot about the faith that you practice today. There's also, of course, historical studies. Know where your church came from and know the history before your church. No church just began in the past 50 or 100 years, but we're part of a 2,000 years tradition, and Christians need to know that tradition. And every church is part of God's family tree, and how it goes is important for us to see where we fit. And finally, the ritual and traditions. People complain about empty rituals, and rituals that are empty are soul-destroying. But ritual does not have to be empty. Tradition does not have to be empty. It can be full. Many times we don't appreciate what our church does simply because we don't know why they do it. The way we worship is important, and it's very important that we understand the way we worship and what it is that the symbols of our worship mean. Here's what it means to taste the fruits of our heritage. What does your church do better than everyone else? Find out the positive things about your traditions and celebrate them. What variations exist within your tradition? Don't just think about your own local church, but how does your church relate to other churches which may be in the same denomination or the same kind of church? You'll find that there's wide varieties within every tradition. And finally, what's good about other traditions of the faith? Take some time to look around and to appreciate the many different ways that Christians seek God and worship. What do we learn from studying the teachings of the church? Well, first of all, remember that theological formulations are never exact. They're simply models of the truth. They are not the truth themselves. It's more of an art than a science, actually. Doctrinal teaching is an attempt to explain the unexplainable. So there are weaknesses and strengths in every doctrinal system. Most studies of denominationalism, unfortunately, focuses on the difference of doctrine. A more interesting and fruitful study may be how we express the same doctrines in different ways. Look and see how not only how we differ, but how we disagree, how we all agree. One common place we can study and benefit from teachings of many churches is simply by reading through the doctrinal statements, the catechisms, and especially the hymn books of the church. Hymns are often the best expression of doctrines of our church. God gave us scholars and teachers who debated, challenged, speculated, and questioned, discarding bad ideas and keeping good ones. We're free to doubt and disagree and speculate on doctrine, but also we must understand who we are disagreeing. Don't write off a doctrine of your church until you have thoroughly explored why it says and believes what it says. How do we come to appreciate the rituals? Well, remember that rituals are history lived out in practice. The symbolisms of rituals is a rich source of understanding history. Rituals speak to us when words do not. Rituals remind us of God's continual presence in their life. Their very repetition reminds us that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Our heritage can be a witness to the world today. In a postmodern world where truth is presumed to be the product of a contemporary consensus, having roots and traditions gives us stability. The ancient faith is like a mighty oak. Our modern faith is like a tumbleweed, rootless and forever blown by the winds of contemporary trends. For that reason, contemporary people are looking today for a religious experience that has roots and meaning. That is why you see a trend of growing of Christians going towards Eastern Orthodoxy and even Roman Catholicism to get back to something which has some heritage and traditions to it. Now, as important as our heritage is, it is critically important that we also understand the limits of it. Ancestor worship is an ancient idol and an enemy of Christianity. We cannot worship our ancestors. We must worship the God of our ancestors. First of all, begin by admitting that our teachers, our forefathers, can be wrong in their beliefs, feelings, and practice. Make them prove it by questioning them. Read the past, but read it always with a critical eye. And do not be stuck in the past, but live in the present. Our ancestors were not stuck in the past. They made changes because they needed to make changes. We need to understand that as well, that if we're to honor our ancestors, we must be willing to change.
Mine once said to me that the definitions of tradition and nostalgia, that nostalgia is the dead faith of the living. Tradition is the living faith of the dead. And I really believe this. If we love the past for past's sake, then that becomes an idol to us and a stumbling block, mere nostalgia. But if we look to the past as a kind of a mine, where we can reach down and dig out precious things for today, it can be a source of great enlightenment and great strength for us. It can enrich our lives in the present.